Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to have you with us today, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are in the world. It's nice to have everyone with us. It's really fantastic. It's joining us from all over the world. It's webinar 3, and today we're talking about adding the brain to the education equation. I hope that the title depicts what I'm going to talk about today. It's something that we have been speaking about at Arrowsmith for quite a long time, and certainly our founder, Barbara Arrowsmith Young, has been. And we love the idea of this, and so I hope that you can join us on the journey to add the brain to the education equation. Today, I'm Debbie Gilmore, and I'm joined by Tara, who has been chatting with us already. She's our site implementation advisor. In the last 2 seminars of our series, we've taken a look at how important our brains are in our lives, how our brain helps us to understand, participate, and contribute in the world. Sometimes we go through our day forgetting that this amazing, complex organ of our bodies makes every second possible. To add to this amazingness factor, we also forget that each of our brains are different from each other's. They're unique, and that our brains can change. We actually have control over that. And if you were with us in the second webinar, we talked about that. I think if you weren't able to join us for the webinars, you might be able to take a look at those recordings. I think you have links to those. So today, what I'm really hoping to look at is the call for educational reform, 21st century learning skills, and focusing on strengthening the brain. Emily, do we have the poll results in?
Yeah, it looks like it's slowed down with the answering. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So the results are 73% are parents, 30% are educators. Then the next, there's 29% mental health practitioner and tutor learning center owner. We've got a couple 6%, a nurse doctor, and then some school administrators. So welcome, everyone.
Fabulous to have you with us. And I really like to know who's with us, because hopefully I can capture some of this webinar for you. I hope it's relevant to everyone. So thank you for participating in our poll. With our experience and knowledge of the brain, knowing how important and amazing our brain is, today we're going to look at the brain in education. Now, some may think, well, yes, that's a no-brainer. Sorry, pardon the pun, that yes, surely we have the brain in education. Well, actually, I've been in education my whole career, and I'm still a little surprised how little the brain is mentioned in any education-focused professional development, in education, in university courses, in curriculum development, in syllabi. In fact, it wasn't until 2010, after being in education for over 30 years, that I read the word neuroplasticity for the first time. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not laying blame or being negative towards education systems. I worked in one of the best. It is how it is represented. It is how they have been developed. How have schools been developed in our society? But now there's a growing cry for a number of decades now for change to this system. And that's what our webinar is about today. How can we, as parents, as educators, as health practitioners, how can we put the brain in the education equation? How can we make a change for our children? What can each of us do? One of the leading educators calling for reform for education systems over the past probably 4 or 5 decades now was the late Sir Ken Robinson. You probably have heard of him. I'm sure the educators with us have heard of him. He calls for us to redefine what schools look like. In that request, he describes what schools are. And I don't think that we can argue with these. They're places where a community of learners gather, where they learn from each other, that are social, that are connected through technology, and where learning is personal. Does everyone agree with that? Well, for those educators with us, and in general, probably, schools and school systems are not really set up to foster this description of what a school is. There are definitely elements of this right in our classrooms and in schools. But in general, schools are set up in a little different way at that system level. Think about your most recent experience with a school. I'd like to think that there is a movement now towards the description of a school that you're seeing from Sir Ken there. Maybe you want to add in your thoughts in the chat. What's your most recent experience? Is it looking like these? Are you seeing a turn in what schools look like? So just getting back to Sir Ken, you might want to take time to watch the 11-minute animated video that he has put together for the history of the schooling system. It's really quite interesting. The link is there on the screen, but also Emily will add it in the chat. You know, the schools were set up in the late 1800s using an industrial model. It was set up to educate masses of children when it was decided that we needed to educate all children. It was about conformity and standardization. And that video really does show that change of where schools have been and where he would love to see them go. He did an interesting study on divergent thinking. So have a look out for that in the video. It's really very interesting about what he sees. Tara, have people been able to add their recent experiences of schools? Can you sum it up in 30 seconds?
Not yet. I wonder if they're particularly intrigued about what you've just described in the video. We don't have anyone
Okay.
commenting yet.
No worries. Well, we'll move on then. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a couple of now. I wonder if there's just a slight delay.
Go for it.
So just some pretty compelling nouns, I will say, a bit of an indictment from Christy remembers or even sees today: rigid and formulaic. Leslie shares, I see this too, Leslie. I see the classrooms with the hope of what was shown, but not enough staff to fulfill these hopes. So the desire and hope is there, but some practical pieces are missing. And Daniel, an optimistic view, sees it as good.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your experience of recent school. So what are other bodies asking for change in educational reform? Well, in 2019, the OECD published a report on their vision for learning in 2030 called the Learning Compass. And Emily will put that link up in a little while. But the OECD calls for students to be active participants in their own learning. Now, the educators amongst us will know that we really try to get students active in their own learning. The OECD also calls for, and this is something that I really loved in this report, is that they have called for the learning process and student well-being to be as valued as much as academic performance. I think that's really quite remarkable. In the report also, it provides 7 elements of their learning compass. It has core foundations. Now, these are things most probably we are used to in curriculum documents. These are core skills, knowledge, attitudes, values, the prerequisites for learning. But then there's some difference in their call for change. They add to their list transformative competencies. So creating new value and dilemmas, taking responsibility, student agency, where students have the ability to influence their own lives and make change in their world. Now, we'll see here also knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. Now, they mention those in their core foundations, but here they note them separately. They really want them at a higher level than the core competencies. They want to take those to the next notch. And the next part is what I really love, the anticipation, action, and reflection cycle. This is valuing the iterative learning process. So what stands out to me in these 7 elements is the role of the brain in these processes. Students need strong functioning in order to reap the benefits of this reform. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So the Learning Compass report goes on to list 11 factors of well-being. And I've listed 5 here: jobs, income, life satisfaction, education, community. And one of the reasons those jumped out at me is because it reminded me so much of the definition of positive mental health from the World Health Organization, where every individual realizes his or her own potential. They can cope with the normal stresses of life, they can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. I wonder what the mental health practitioners in our group think about this. What do parents think about this? It'd be interesting to hear from you. Of course, this definition of mental health, positive mental health, is not always the outcome for our students, sadly. But again, you know, here we need the educational reform, and let's put the brain back in the education equation. The OECD hopes that by developing responsive education systems, we can help our children adapt to, thrive in, and even shape whatever the future holds. And isn't that the hope for all of us? Emily's going to add in a link now to that report. But one of the things I loved as I was reading this report, I found this gorgeous little animation video, and I'm going to show it now. I think it's all summed up in here. Fingers crossed, this works.
As our societies evolve, so do our education systems. But what does the future of education look like? To answer this question and understand how traditional models are evolving, we looked at emerging features that may become the new normal in education systems around the world. What did we see? Traditionally, in education systems, decisions are made by a select group of people, and everyone has a distinct role. Students learn by listening to their teachers, teachers teach, and principals manage the schools. The curriculum is linear and standardized. Academic performance is prioritized, and students are assessed through standardized tests. How is this changing? Education systems embodying the new normal are part of a larger ecosystem where decision-making and responsibilities are shared among a wide group of stakeholders, and students are active participants in their own learning. In these schools, the learning process and student well-being are also valued in addition to academic performance. There is a recognition that students come from different backgrounds and learn in different ways. Learning happens in a non-linear process with different types of assessments used for different purposes. These schools are monitored no longer just to ensure accountability, but also to encourage frequent feedback at all levels to continually improve the education system. The future, by definition, is unpredictable, but by developing responsive education systems, we can help our children adapt to, thrive in, and even shape whatever the future holds. To find out how you can help too, visit our website.
I hope that you found that really interesting about what that new normal might look like for our students and our children. Not only did Sir Ken Robinson and the OECD calling for educational reform, so is the World Economic Forum. In their report, The Future of Jobs, launched at Davos in January 2016, the World Economic Forum asked chief human resources and strategy officers from leading global employers what the top skills were, specifically for employment skills and recruitment across various industries and geographies. So you'll see there in 2015, what those top skills were. And then they re-looked at that. And in 2020, you can see some shift in there. Again, similar elements to the OECD Learning Compass, that this list of skills contains thinking skills, social skills, all linked to cognitive functioning. Students are required to have really strong cognitive functioning in the 21st century. In another WEF report in March 2016, it was stated that the gap between the skills people learn and the skills people need is becoming more obvious, as traditional learning falls short of equipping students with knowledge they need to thrive. They came up with their own list of 21st century skills. Again, take a look at the thinking processes and qualities in here. Once again, cognitive functioning has a huge part to play in these literacies, competencies, and qualities. I want you to imagine for a moment. You can add your thoughts into the chat if you like. What if your child was able to have the skills that the World Economic Forum sees as critical for the 21st century? What would that look like? What would you feel about that? All of the participants today, no matter what hat you're wearing, I'm sure can relate to that. In various literacies, we need the printed word in numeracy, in science, in technology, in finance, culture, and civics. They need various competencies to achieve that. They need critical thinking. They need creativity, communication, collaboration. Some of these words, I'm sure, are resonating from some of those other education reform movements. They need character qualities of curiosity, initiative, grit, adaptability, leadership, social and cultural awareness. And I think you would all agree that this is what we want for our children, to have them become independent in their world of the future. So imagine a world where this is possible for your children. So looking at this educational reform, how is it possible? How can this reform take place? While the OECD and the World Economic Forum have listed these skills, we need to work out a way to make this happen in schools. It is possible. We can add the brain fair and square into the education equation by including cognitive education and neuroplasticity into our classrooms. And as a recap, for those who may not have participated with us in our webinars before, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change both its physical structure, its functional organization, to form new neural connections. And this happens throughout our lifetime. So, how do we want our children to change their brains? In what ways do we want them to change their brains so that they gain all of the skills for their futures? Rather than look purely at the academic achievements, let me ask you to look at our brains in a way that you might not have thought to before. Let me ask you to think about how our brain works, how they function. So on here, on the screen, you'll see some descriptors of various cognitive functions of the brain. There's a function that has the capacity to read non-verbal cues necessary for navigating social interactions. There's a function that we use for visual memory functions that we need for reading and spelling patterns. There's spatial reasoning. There's a function which has the capacity to help us, which gives us the capacity to recognize faces and objects. There's functions that we sometimes call executive functions, necessary for strategic and critical thinking, planning, problem solving, mental initiative. There's capacity for grasping relationships, reasoning, comprehension. And in fact, we call that cognitive function symbol relations. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we actually have a town hall coming up for that on March 30 and April 13. So if you're interested there, I think that Emily will add a link if you would like to join us. There are other cognitive functions that are auditory functions that give us auditory memory functions, involved in retaining information. There's the function that gives us the capacity for quantification, required for mental calculations. So, you know, those mental calculations that we carry out that are necessary, but we probably forget that they are also required for time scheduling and budgeting, same cognitive function. We also have the ability and the function to learn motor patterns that we need for writing and reading. So let me go back to the WEF 21st century skills. And what I'd like to do now is marry some of those functions I just talked about with these skills. So that capacity to read nonverbal cues necessary for navigating social interactions, that underpins these, the things that are underlined, the skills that are underlined on the right-hand side. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on these slides, but I just want to, as I go through them, take a look at the function and then how it is used across many of these skills. This visual memory function for learning and reading writing patterns, of course, they're all part of the literacies that we need. There's the capacity to recognize faces and objects. So many of these 21st century skills need that. The executive functions that are required for strategic and critical thinking. So many skills require that strong functioning. The capacity to grasp relationships, to reason. It happens nearly in everything that we need to do. That's that one I talked about, symbol relations. We have the auditory memory functions involved in retaining information. Look at how many skills that is required for that. Quantification sense, that mental calculation here. Motor patterns, these are the skills. So you can see from that linkage that these cognitive functions are really required in so many of the skills that we need every single day and what our children will need for the future. What we do know, and I think I said it right at the beginning of this webinar, our brains are unique. Everyone has their own individual capacity for cognitive functioning. Our own, what we call a unique cognitive profile. So what we do know is that each of us have the capacity to strengthen that cognitive functioning. And so if you're interested in knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, you may want to complete our cognitive profile questionnaire. It's on our website. And again, Emily can put the link in the chat. It really does give you where your strengths are and in particular where your weaknesses might lie. It might match up with how you think you operate, actually. I find it really interesting doing that. So through the power of the brain to change, the power of neuroplasticity, we can all enhance our brains and our cognitive functioning. How can we do this? We do it through cognitive exercises or cognitive programming. It's an intentional effort to target and strengthen these specific functions in the brain. Of course, neuroplasticity is involved in all learning. But if we want to really strengthen the cognitive capacities that we have or our children have, we have to do it intentionally. We have to target and strengthen specific functions. So that's where the neuroplasticity can join with cognitive programming to enhance that cognitive capacity. We can strengthen those new neural networks. The underlying premise of this is that we change the brain, we change the cognitive capacity, we change academic outcomes, we change social and emotional outcomes and well-being for our children. We transform the future of the learner. We help them increase their ability to use their skills of the 21st century. Now, in fact, the brain imaging that has been conducted on our Arrowsmith program has showed us that. We've seen increased connectivity in the default mode network, the salience network, the executive control network. These networks are involved in a number of processes essential for learning, all of which improved as the brain is strengthened. Attention is one of those. These networks are critical for regulating and directing our attention. They engage our brain to maintain attention on a task. These networks are involved in thinking and planning. The ability to deliberately guide our actions to accomplish goals and to use past experiences to plan for the future. They are involved in working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information in our mind, which is required for comprehension, memory, self-awareness, mental initiative. So more activation in these networks is beneficial to all aspects of learning. It improves the learner's capacity to learn. These are all needed for 21st century skills. Researchers have also found that after 3 months of a cognitive intensive program, which strengthens that function that I talked about, the symbol relations. Parents were asked by researchers to report on the changes that they saw in their children after that. And I particularly pull out here the engagement, use of language, and emotional intelligence. If you remember those 21st century skills, these are critical to that. Remember the call for education reform. They're calling for students to be engaged more in their learning, to have that social and emotional well-being. It's so critically important here. Now, what about the social and emotional well-being that the OECD report calls for, where learning processes and student well-being are valued as much as academic performance? Well, we have seen, this is a researcher at UBC, University of British Columbia, found that students engaged in a cognitive program over the course of a year reported a greater sense of well-being. They had a more open mindset. They had increased sense of control. They saw themselves as agents of change in their lives. That rings a bell for me for that OECD list. The researchers saw an increase in their social and leadership skills, a greater ability to focus and attend. They also saw a reduction in anxiety and depression, and that there was a positive trend in reduction of the stress hormone, cortisol. Really fabulous results that are being seen from that cognitive program. So you might be asking, how can children increase their functioning while they're at school? Well, they can do it. They can do it through very specific cognitive programming that works alongside their academic program. So let me explain for a little bit. We call this our whole cohort program, where students spend 30 to 40 minutes a day in their regular day doing a cognitive program that is targeted at a specific cognitive function. So you'll see on the slide here that there is a number beside a particular cognitive function. So that is the grade. So our thoughts are, and in fact it is working in schools right now, where students in grade 1 work on and strengthen the ability to learn motor patterns. In grade 2, the visual memory functions. Grade 3, the capacity for that mental calculation. Grade 4, the reasoning. Grade 5, the executive functions. Grade 6, the capacity to perceive the nonverbal cues. And grade 7 and 8, auditory memory. So by the time they get to high school, and for those of us in Australia, of course, they've hit high school by grade 7. So by the time they get to high school, they'll have the opportunity to strengthen each of these functions year after year after year, no matter where they are on that continuum of learning. So you'll see that continuum there. All of us, again, as I've said, we have a unique cognitive profile. We're somewhere along that continuum on each of the functions. So as students go through school, they get to strengthen these functions year after year after year. We have this happening in schools right now, which is very exciting for us. We have this educational reform has commenced. Over the last several years, there have been a number of schools that have started where one whole grade has completed a cognitive program over the course of the year. We're very excited because this year we have 2 schools that are using that multiple year approach where students from grade 1 to 6 are doing a cognitive program every year. And so each year as they progress, as I said, they'll strengthen a different function. And we're seeing great results in this. One school in Australia actually did the motor planning cognitive function in the whole cohort program. And this data you see on the screen is from that. They had 4 grade 1 classes who did the Wold sentence copy test. One of those classes, which is here labelled as the Arrowsmith class, did 30 minutes a day on strengthening that motor pattern cognitive function. And this is the results they got for that. You can see that pre and post test, the change in those students compared to the other grade 1 classes in that year. And anecdotally, the teacher told us that in this Arrowsmith group, 5 students had been identified in kindergarten as at risk for reading problems and needing reading recovery. After 10 weeks in the program, those students were de-identified. So we can see the impact that it has right across across academics, but also across the cognitive functioning that is required. In Spain, there's been a school that has been doing this with grade 3 and grade 1. They've actually taken the symbol relations cognitive function, and they have been doing that 40 minutes a day, 5 days a week. In grade 3, they did it over 3 months, in grade 1 over 4 months. You can see there the changes that we're seeing. Visual spatial ability increased, attention, planning abilities, executive functioning. And that school is one of the other schools that now are taking on that multiple school approach. So what do we dream of? We dream of a day when cognitive programs are a normal part of the journey of education, and where every student has the opportunity to achieve their full potential with access to both academic learning and cognitive enhancement. It's through cognitive transformation that we unlock each of our children's gifts, allowing them to dream, allowing them to achieve the skills that they require for the 21st century and the rest of their lives. In our next webinar, we're going to look at how we learn, the brain's role in academics. And Tara is going to continue to explore these cognitive functions that we discussed today, linking them to the traditional academic areas of the curriculum, and knowing how important these cognitive functions are, not only in academics, but across all of the 21st century learning skills. So that's the end of my part of the webinar, and I thank you for being attentive to that. We will go to our question and answer session now, Tara, if that's okay. And while, please feel free to use the Q&A section, the box now, and add your questions in there, and Tara will take us through those. And we'll leave this slide up. These are some links that you might want, or email addresses you might want to use to find out more information. But Tara, I'll stop talking now and I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Well, you won't be stopping for long because some of these questions I know will appreciate your insight. So we certainly have a few curiosities from our friends tonight. The first question is, Debbie, could you speak more to the social skills area versus the academic? Are there differences in changes in those areas versus traditional academics?
It's certainly what we've seen in the research is that these cognitive functions, as they're strengthened, impact many areas of a person's life. So certainly we see the academic changes, but because let me take the reasoning cognitive function, for example. This helps us understand and comprehend what is happening, putting I always call it kind of connecting the dots. It helps us connect cause and effect. It helps us put this piece of information with this piece of information. Now, while that is really useful in academics, it's really, really important in our social lives, in understanding the what is happening. This happened because of this, connecting those dots. The other cognitive function that really does look at that social aspect and is the one we call nonverbal thinking, where students are strengthening that cognitive function, which allows them to navigate the social world. You know, we see when someone doesn't have it. We see it when they walk into a room and someone acts inappropriately. Well, by strengthening that, it really helps someone to navigate and understand what is happening in those social settings. So if we take those two cognitive functions as an example, what we see is that someone can understand what's happening. They're understanding a conversation. They're understanding what's happening in a social situation. That then says, oh, okay, I can handle this. I'm confident. I can do this. That impacts their well-being. That impacts their confidence. It impacts their resilience. All of those social measures. And I would really, the person that asked that question, I'd really encourage you to go into our website and have a look at our research and some of the research we've done has been on the Woodcock-Johnson, not only the academic performance measures, but also on the cognitive performance. And in there, you'll see where those social measures or those cognitive functions really have improved that impact that social emotional well-being. So I really encourage you, and I think Emily put the link to our research in the chat. Take that and have a look through our research, because there's a number of studies that have pulled apart some of those social emotional well-being pieces. So I'd encourage you to do that.
There's another question. Thank you, Debbie. And by the way, if we don't get to all of these questions before the close of our session, please be assured we will email you directly with some feedback. But I'm sharing this one because it's interesting. Anyone who has come across our particular work before probably knows or is familiar with Arrowsmith's application for children with learning difficulties. And in fact, and this question is related to that because, of course, much of what Debbie has shared today is a much more broad view of educational reform and, in fact, cognitive training as it relates to perhaps any of us. And we have a guest here who, I'm not sure, Christine, if you are a teacher or a parent at a particular school where the Arrowsmith program is run. So again, some of you may be new to this session and may not know that the Arrowsmith methodology, the series of exercises that Debbie has described briefly, the cognitive program, is available to schools and learning organizations, and they implement it within their own school community. So Christine is here with us today from one of those schools. And she's asked that, to her knowledge, the Arrowsmith program is used as a learning support resource for children in her school. But because Christine, you and all of us have heard Debbie describe it as benefits for all, Christine's curious, is the Arrowsmith program accessible otherwise to parents, for example? Can they opt in to have their children who may not have learning support requirements, but we see the benefit of cognitive programming? So
Yeah, absolutely, Tara. Any of us can opt in to strengthen these cognitive functions. And schools or our sites around the world who operate the Arrowsmith program can absolutely implement what we call a cognitive enhancement program. So whether schools are doing it as I've talked about, where whole grades strengthen that cognitive function, or where some students or some parents want their child to opt in to strengthen a particular cognitive function. For example, symbol relations. Really, I know I've mentioned it a number of times, it's actually one of our most critical cognitive functions that we use every day. We have had schools do that, Christine. We've had schools offer these cognitive enhancement programs either as an elective during the school day. In fact, there's a school in Washington State that does that. They've offered symbol relations as an elective program or class from grade 6 to 11. I think they've been doing that. Or some schools have been doing it as an after-school program, like before or after school. Some schools have tried that period zero, that period at the beginning of the day. And let me tell you, doing symbol relations at the beginning of the day is a really great way to wake up the brain for the whole school day. But yeah, so absolutely, yes is the short answer, and my answer was much longer than that.
thanks, Debbie. And thank you, Christine, for that. I think it helps us all to keep that in mind. We have a question about diagnoses from Andrea. What are the tests that you recommend in order to diagnose kids who do have difficulties in school?
Well, really, we would have to, schools have their own assessment procedures, so I don't want to step into that foray, but certainly there is an Arrowsmith assessment. And Arrowsmith assessments really assess the functioning of each of the cognitive functions that Arrowsmith can address or that Arrowsmith can strengthen. And though I do want to make it clear that for students, for schools that are doing a whole cohort program or a cognitive enhancement program, they do not require an assessment to do that. It's like an opt-in program, and we start wherever their functioning is and we enhance that. Even if they're at average or above average, we can continue to enhance that function to strengthen, to be better. So I just want to make that clear. If someone is doing an Arrowsmith assessment, it isn't a diagnostic tool. We do not, the Arrowsmith assessment does not diagnose learning disabilities or learning difficulties. What it does do is able to identify where a person, no matter their age, is on that continuum of cognitive functioning. So yeah, I really don't want to get into the many diagnostic tools that are out there and are different in all parts of the world, and so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Oh, an interesting question from Sharon. Has this program been implemented for those recovering from TBI for young and older students, adults?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's an organization on the west coast of North America, out in west coast of Canada, in Vancouver, that is working with sites that specifically are targeting those with a TBI or an ABI. That's traumatic brain injury or an acquired brain injury. Emily, you might want to pop in the chat there the link to the ABI Wellness and it's on our website that I would encourage anyone that's interested in that field to contact ABI Wellness. They are using the Arrowsmith cognitive programming as part of one pillar of a 4-pillar approach to help those people with acquired or traumatic brain injuries. And also on our website under research, you will find some of the research that has been done with that population. So again, short answer, yes. Long answer is mine.
So in fact, somewhat related to this, because you mentioned that ABI Wellness is based in Vancouver here in Canada, although they other clinics around North America offer Arrowsmith within the ABI Wellness program. And Michelle asks, is this an online program? So maybe that helps to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, one of the blessings of COVID, I have to say, is that we have been able to take our in-person program and make it work beautifully online. And in fact, we did some internal research where we wanted to make sure that our students, we always focus on our students, but we wanted to make sure that by taking it online, they were making progress. So we analyzed a group of students that were working in person and a group of students that were online, and we saw hardly any difference in the progress those students were making. So we're really encouraged now that this cognitive program can be administered online. We encourage it to be done in a synchronous virtual classroom. And so, yeah, it's very encouraging. So that is available to all our sites around the world, not only not only our school sites, but also the ABI Wellness sites.
So speaking of school, the earliest grade that a child can begin a program like this?
Around about age 6. So although we would love to trial it in a younger group, but we haven't done that yet. It would look a little different, but age 6 is probably the first. And that's why in our whole cohort program, you'll see that the first grade is grade 1. Now, depending where you are and how you name grades around the world, grade 1 in North American, even Australian language, is the second year of school. So those cognitive functions that we had in that order are kind of linked to what the students are doing in their grade in that year. So in grade 1, that's when they're learning to read and write. And that's why we've chosen that motor symbol sequencing cognitive function to strengthen. So yeah, around about age 6 is what we would recommend.
Thank you, Debbie. Oh, we have a question from a parent curious about summer training, but particularly for exercises beyond the symbol relations program. So many of you, again, may be familiar with the different programs available through Arrowsmith and licensed sites. And certainly, Debbie, you've mentioned the power of symbol relations. Are other programs available through the summer program specifically?
Not yet. We are concentrating on symbol relations, and we're really happy with how that program has rolled out. We trialed it for a number of years to make sure that, let me step back for people that don't know. And, you know, if you want to learn more about this, join our town hall that's coming up. But what we did a number of years ago is took the 4 hours a week that is required to work on a cognitive function or strengthen that cognitive function. We took those 4 hours a week over the course of a school year and compressed them into a 6-week in-person course. We now do that online as well. So now we can intensify that strengthening of that cognitive function over a 6 to 8 week period, which is very exciting. And so right now, that is all we have. We would love that in our future we are able to offer other cognitive functions in that. So in absence of that, what I would encourage is for people to look out for that cognitive enhancement program where someone can join 4 hours a week to strengthen those cognitive functions that are not symbol relations.
Thank you, Debbie. Another somewhat practical question, but an important one from Tina. Are students grouped by skill, need, or age in a typical Arrowsmith classroom?
It's really such a great question, Tara. When I first saw students working in an Arrowsmith classroom, and in fact, it was Tara that led me through the school in Toronto, when I saw that, I saw students who were working individually on their own individualized program. Now, being in education for over 30 years, I really heard the words of that in schools, in our school systems, that an individualized program, students working to, progress in what they need. Probably the first time I ever saw that was in an Arrowsmith classroom. The program is definitely individualized for those students with learning difficulties. Let me just put parameters around that. So students that are working on their own individualized program are not grouped to be with, they're not grouped, all the students at this rating and symbol relations are working together. No, everyone is working individually. It's another beauty of seeing the students work together because there's no competition. Everyone is working on their own personal best, and encouraging their peers to do their personal best. It really is. If you ever get the chance to pop your head into an Arrowsmith classroom, it's really, really very exciting to see the students at work and so encouraging. And, one of the skills that we want our students to have is that engaging in their own learning, have that agency in their own learning. And that's exactly what happens when students are working in this cognitive program. In some schools might want to choose to put age groups together, and it would only be for ease, really. It is not necessary. One of the most exciting classes I've seen is where there have been students from age 6 up to age 30, and they're all working together in the classroom. Actually, I love that sort of classroom. And Tara, you would have experienced that in the school in Toronto. I love that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. You can't make any assumptions about who the leaders will be, who the shy will be, who will help, who. It's really a age agnostic and beautiful, beautiful experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what a great session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Tara, for leading us through the Q&A session. Thank you to Emily for being our poll master and our chat queen there. Thank you to Sojin for helping us out in the background there. Really fantastic. And thank you to everyone for joining us.